You've got almost an impossible situation at the moment with the number of police officers we've got and the amount of work that they're expected to do.
Coming up on British Thought Leaders, Chris Hobbs, an ex-Metropolitan Police officer who served over 30 years. Chris talks about the everyday challenges facing our police forces, from lack of funding through to media attacks.
There is a problem in the Met, and that problem is really one of morale at the moment. And every time somebody sticks the boot in, that morale sinks a little bit further. And the good stuff that officers do very often never sees the light of day.
He gives insight into London's problems with shoplifting, street crime and violent gangs.
The gang problem in London is massive, and it's made worse by the fact that the gang leaders, the drill rappers, are personalities literally worshipped and followed by hundreds of thousands of youngsters. It's a major problem.
Welcome to British Thought Leaders. I'm Lee Hall. Today I'm sitting down with Chris Hobbs, a former police officer who spent 32 years with the Metropolitan Police. Chris, thanks for joining us.
No problem.
Oh, policing's such a hot topic. There's loads of stuff I wanted to talk to you about. I was going to start with this letter recently from the police watchdog to the Home Secretary. It talked about police staff networks driven by identity politics, and so they're compromising impartiality. As a former officer, what are your thoughts on that?
To be quite honest, I think the police pretty much retain impartiality. They're faced with a very complex situation at the moment on the streets. Politically, of course, they frequently come under attack, as they do from the media. I think basically the guys and girls out there on the front line do the best they possibly can in the circumstances, and I do think they do so without fear or favour. What it's easy for critics to pick on is where it goes wrong. And it does go wrong. Obviously, if you've got, say, in the Met over 1,999 calls a year, some of those are going to go not as the police would want them to go. And I think what is ignored, by and large, is when it goes right. So everyone's a critic at the moment, be they from the political right or from the political left. But by and large, I think those on the front line do a pretty good job, and they do it impartially, but no one's going to give them credit for that.
As we see the footage of the rainbow police cars, police getting their faces painted and stuff, but we don't see much footage of police out there just doing their ordinary job every day, dealing with so many different issues. Do you think the media kind of give the police a fair and unbiased coverage?
No, I don't. It's easy to pick on, as I say, when things do go wrong. In terms of rainbow cars, there has been a big effort by police to get the gay community, as it were, on side. Sometimes, yes, you look at these pictures and it goes a little bit over the top. It's the same, remember, taking the knee.
Yeah.
Now, the far right bring up taking the knee at every opportunity, and by my calculation, and I followed this very closely at the time, where it happened and where it was reported, and I think possibly around 30 to 40 officers out of 120-odd thousand took the knee. And that stopped pretty soon after police officers were attacked by the Black Lives Matter protest in Whitehall. We didn't see any taking of the knee after that. It was in the immediate aftermath of that particular very unpleasant death that we saw, obviously, on networks throughout the world. So 40 officers, and yet it's, when you sort of see what people on, especially on the far right, it's just about every officer in the Met and elsewhere was crashing to his knees at every opportunity. It wasn't like that, but like so many of these things, it gets wildly exaggerated and gets incorporated into folklore, really. And this is just one example of where that happened. Same with the rainbow cars and the face painting. Yes, it did happen, but it wasn't on a particularly massive scale. But again, there's no point in denying it happened. But unfortunately, that will always be with the Met, and every so often it will be brought up, even sometimes when it's years old. Probably in 10 years' time they'll be showing pictures of rainbow cars when they want to attack the Met or some other police force in the country.
One of the big issues of recent months has, of course, been the protests, the Israel-Palestine protests, probably the biggest protests we've seen, really, of media attention. a lot of members of the public getting quite enthused about it all. I mean, what difficulties and challenges would policing something like that bring?
Well, I've been on just about every protest that there's been. I think I missed one when I wasn't particularly well. So I've seen them. I've not been part of them as such. I've been there to observe and write articles for Police Oracle and whoever else wants them. Again, what we've seen is gross exaggeration of what's gone on. Whatever your views are on the situation with Palestine, those protests, by and large, as the Met have said, have been mainly without incident. Where you've got the incident with the War Memorial in Hyde Park, I didn't even know there was a War Memorial there, to be quite honest. And I'm not sure that the protesters who went running over it and were told to get down and did, were even aware of its significance. So that, again, I think has been blown a little bit out of proportion. Jihadi chants. I've heard twice on all the protests I've been on chants about jihad. Both by very small groups of people. One was a midweek protest outside Downing Street. Another one was the one in Carnaby Street outside Puma stores. But it was only a few people. So the majority of protesters, I think, haven't really been a problem for police. The worst violence that was seen, that the police had to deal with, was when counter-protesters, the football lads, turned up on the 11th of November. And even after 11 o'clock, they were still hanging around Parliament Square looking for confrontations. So that was the worst violence that I've seen. Again, it's a very emotive subject, isn't it? I've seen the footage. It was sent to me from the 7th of October. I've never seen anything more horrific in my life. I was in tears watching it. It will haunt me. But at the same time, of course, we now see these images, children being pulled from the rubble after Israeli bombing. You have to say that, yes, you can see the Israelis' point of view that Hamas, if they're not destroyed, will come back again and perhaps commit another atrocity. So it's a very complex issue for police officers to actually deal with. But by and large, in terms of disorder, there hasn't been a huge amount of disorder on these protests, which, considering the numbers and the emotions that this obviously engenders, is probably quite remarkable, to be quite honest. They create, or the media, sections of the media create this impression that it's like Attila the Hun, the hordes rampaging through the West End. Most of them are well behaved, may not agree with what they say, may not agree with some of the speakers, but they're not throwing insults at police, they're not attacking police officers. One attack on a police officer in Whitehall, he was quite badly hurt, he was hit over the head, which came out of nothing. I've not seen huge insults thrown at police officers, which you had with anti-lockdown protests, which you tend to have with more right-wing protests. Police officers just get abuse. I've seen very little of that. So whatever your views are, the majority of protesters who've gone on these protests so far haven't really caused any major problems. And even where you get pushing and shoving, it happened in St James's Park recently. I was there. It wasn't very pleasant, but nobody got badly hurt. But again, those little shots were portrayed on social media and mainstream media, and you looked at it and you thought, oh, it's a bit nasty. On a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being what we saw in 2011, where you had a real threat to life with the violence in those riots. The Palestinian protests, probably, that I've seen, the disorder would 2 out of 10 on the scale of disorder. But obviously the views are controversial, and many people feel that if you're waving a Palestinian flag, you're supporting Hamas. And that's where I think you get this sort of conflict in social media and mainstream media. But from a policing point of view, famous last words, so far, the disorder hasn't been particularly significant. It's the numbers that have been a problem. And as for people saying, well, let's go in and smash it up, and well, if you banned it and you get 30,000 people turn up, what do you do then? And on these protests, you also get an inordinate amount of children, toddlers in pushchairs and babies in prams. So if you do go in as police heavy-handed because they've been banned or something's happening you want to stop, and you get children getting injured, my goodness, can you imagine the stick the police would get then? So it's a complicated situation for the police.
So there was, with the memorial thing, there were accusations of two-tier policing because they were saying people are being allowed to climb on the memorials, but the Met said it's not actually a crime, and so the most they can do is intervene and say that's not appropriate. I mean, how would it feel for the officers? I mean, maybe those officers don't agree with people climbing on the war memorials, but they're following the laws, and then suddenly they're getting attacked by politicians, social media, for this two-tier policing.
It was very interesting after that, the debate on social media, including police social media, what offences were there? And you had all these suggestions of a huge variety of potential offences that may have been, but what you're doing there, I think, is really stretching the law to suit those particular circumstances. And one of the problems, of course, when you do get protests in terms of arrests is the difficulties that even a single arrest can cause. Even in these, where I've seen arrests on these protests, officers move in, arrest one person. Then the crowd gets agitated, right, and they scream and shout. They don't push and shove, but they haven't really attacked police officers. But having said that, when someone's arrested, you need a couple of arresting officers. If someone really struggles violently, you might need 5 or 6, because in an ideal world, it's one officer for each limb, it's another officer for the head to stop spitting and biting, it's another officer to look at the welfare of the person who's being arrested, who stands back in an ideal world and makes sure everything's going as it should be going. So that's a lot of officers. You then need a bubble, and this is a technique that the Met have got, I think, from the continent, and continental forces do it. So when you move that person to the prisoner transport, you have a bubble of officers around protecting the officers, the arresting officers, and also perhaps the prisoner, who may, of course, not be in kilter with the protesters. So you might get a far-right protester arrested, and there's pro-Palestinians who might be agitated, or the other way around. So you need a whole lot of officers to make one arrest. Of course, these days everyone's got a mobile phone. I bring mine out. You've got CCTV, you've got body-worn camera footage. So what you can do, and what the police prefer to do, is try and identify those individuals that have broken the law, and then go and grab them at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. That's the preferable way of doing it. Making mass arrests is difficult. Then they've got to go to some custody suite somewhere. And again, if you've got hundreds of arrests, that can cause all sorts of problems, as we saw with Extinction Rebellion. Police have now made hundreds of arrests, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil. But there are issues there in custodising them. And then you've got to get a conviction at court. You've got to get it past the Crown Prosecution Service, who really like winnable cases, and then you've got to get it past the magistrate or past the jury. And certainly with Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, we found where they've actually done, there's no doubt they've done what they've done in terms of criminal damage, but a sympathetic jury just says, well, not guilty. So there's all sorts of obstacles. It's not just as simple as making an arrest. Yeah. And officers, by and large, if you lose large numbers of officers during a protest, then they're going to be gone for the rest of the protests with the paperwork and everything else in the queue for custody. So in some respects, it's better to wait and identify the worst offenders and go after them early morning, 5, 6 o'clock.
A new concept that's come along with technology, this like letting the offence happen and then following up later.
I think it's something that we've evolved gradually too. I mean, I'm not, it's a long time since I was involved in public order, and I don't know what goes on, and I don't think the Met would want to advertise particularly what goes on at public order training. But yes, I think it is something that is expedient. And certainly where you've got these huge protests, they have made some arrests during the protests. And I've seen them. If someone's proclaiming support for Hamas, the officers may make a decision to go in and grab that person and escort them out. But if there's just a couple of officers, as there often is, these liaison officers you see work in pairs by and large. They've not got large numbers of officers with them at the time. So obviously you've got to be circumspect. There's no point in going into a hostile crowd to make an arrest if there's only 2 or 3 of you, because you're going to lose, basically, and the prisoner's probably possibly going to get freed. So I think these days, with all the technology there is, then that's the preferred option. You can have a good look at the footage. You can maybe consult with your own legal people, maybe with the CPS, informal consultations. Do we go with this? And then you move and you arrest the person, and you've got the evidence that you need. And if it's on film, it's incontrovertible, but that still doesn't mean you're going to get a conviction.
Policing's become a bit of a political football, or maybe it has been for quite a long time, really. How does it feel for the officers on the ground when they're seeing the politicians making promises about doing this with policing, doing that?
I've actually got in my bag a long list over the last few months of what police have been told you need to do more. I mean, I can read it out if you want to, but it's a long list of police need to do more with this. Every month, police need to do more about something.
Where does it come from, then? Who says they need to do more?
Well, it could be various bodies. It could be, with mental health, for example, that might be. It could be where someone almost gets wiped up by a cyclist, and there's a campaign of cyclists going through red lights and all the rest of it. It could be thefts, mobile phone thefts. We've recently had Rolex watch robberies. That's the most recent case. Burglaries, police need to do more with burglaries. Shoplifting is another example. There's a whole long list of where various organisations, it could be MPs, it could be the media, say police need to do more. And it is a long list. And of course, they haven't got the resources to make everything a priority. And at the moment, we've got a ridiculous situation with shoplifting. But when I was a PC and we arrested a shoplifter, we would be in and out with that shoplifter within probably an hour, all being well. These days, you're probably going to lose the officer for the rest of the shift, or the officers, because of the paperwork that's involved with a simple shoplifter. I spoke to the commissioner. It was one of these local meetings he attended. And he wasn't just speaking to me, he's spoken to a little group of us. But he made this point. He said, when I was a PC and I arrested someone, he said the case papers would be about that thick, and he used forefinger and thumb. He said, these days when my officers make an arrest, the case papers are that thick. And he made that point very well. It's a huge amount of bureaucracy goes into an arrest. Even when you get attacks on police officers, for sometimes inexplicably, the Crown Prosecution Service will, after all that work, will say, no, we're not going with this. So there's a lot of tension between officers and the Crown Prosecution Service. And often the police will get blamed by the victim if somebody doesn't end up in court being punished for the crime. But often it's the Crown Prosecution Service who say, no, we're going to drop this for whatever. And sometimes they don't even give a reason. And you see it time and time again on police social media, frustrations of officers in dealing with the Crown Prosecution Service. But they've been cut as well. They've suffered cutbacks. So they're struggling under a huge workload, and stuff falls through the cracks. So basically you've got almost an impossible situation at the moment with the number of police officers we've got and the amount of work that they're expected to do. Make us like France, who've got 100,000 more police officers than we have, for a similar sized population, although geographically it's a bigger area. You will get better results. But at the moment, there are not enough police. And at the moment, you've got police officers leaving, certainly in the Met, far faster than they can be recruited. Because the very point you just made, the constant criticism by the media, by politicians, abuse from the public, means that they're saying, I've had enough, I'm going. And they're going. And they're going in frightening numbers. Someone got in touch with me the other day about his shift, you know, the number of people on his shift. And most of them, or a large percentage of them, had less than 2 years service. They were probationers. These were response officers who will go, obviously, to calls, 999 calls. He said just about all the officers have got less than 5 years service. Now, these are the front line. We're expecting these officers to deal with incredibly complicated, difficult, dangerous situations. You really want a backbone of experience, and you haven't got it. It's going. And the experienced officers now are saying, that's it, we've had enough of the Met. We're off, we're leaving policing, or we're transferring to another force. City police, as I understand it, they've got vacancies, and Met detectives in specialist units are being told, right, you've got to leave your specialism, you've got to go back to borough and, you know, fill in the gaps for things like burglaries. We want you back on borough. They're saying, you know, I've climbed the ladder, now I'm being thrown back down it, I'm off. So the city police are apparently, so I hear, are being deluged with applications from the Met who want to, you know, get away from the Met. So there is a problem in the Met, and that problem is really one of morale at the moment. And every time somebody sticks the boot in, that morale sinks a little bit further. And the good stuff that officers do very often never sees the light of day.
I saw a report recently about 365,000 police hours per year are spent removing personal details from files.
I saw that, yeah.
I mean, is excess administration, is it really causing a big problem and stopping police from doing police work?
Well, it is. I mean, just putting case papers together is a real problem. Disclosure, where you've got to decide what you can disclose to the defence, something I never had to deal with. I don't really understand it, to be quite honest, but you have to disclose certain aspects of the case to the defence. That takes a huge amount of time. So yeah, it really is that bureaucracy that police officers have to deal with, and it's not getting any better. Every so often there's a drive to reduce bureaucracy and cut down on paperwork. And the other issue they've got is the technology. For some reason, they've all adopted a certain computer system that keeps crashing and losing all their work. So they're putting complicated case papers together, and all of a sudden it goes. And people keep saying, why are we persisting with these awful computer systems that keep crashing, meaning we've got to spend hours and hours perhaps redoing the work that the computer system has lost. So there's a huge amount of frustration that the technology that the powers that be have decided is suitable for the Met and other forces isn't up to the job, and yet the officers are supposed to make the best of it. Well, it keeps them off the streets. They would much rather be out on the streets and sitting over a computer and tapping stuff out on a tablet, which officers get tablets, you know, great. In some respects, you can put a quick crime report on, you don't have to go back to the police station. But if you're talking about complicated case papers, you need to be sitting at least with a laptop, or preferably in front of the computer. So all these do add to the drip, drip, drip in terms of morale. And then officers saying, oh, no, there's other work out there I can be doing, I'm off. And problems of retention at the moment, police forces generally, and certainly in the Met, are serious. You know, we've got some serious problems in the Met. And apparently, if you believe what you read, there are more cuts on the way. The Commissioner is saying, I've got a shortfall of God knows what, you know, a huge amount of money. You know, what am I expected to do? What is he expected to do? It's going to add, again, to a dip in morale.
We're seeing record levels in shoplifting, personal theft, vehicle theft. But the charging levels are record lows as well and keep going down. I think the charging level for personal theft was 0.8%. I think burglary was about 4%. I mean, how do we understand this situation of the crimes keep going up, the charging levels keep going down? Why are they falling?
Well, it is very hard to say. First of all, you have to make an arrest. You have to get there and you have to make an arrest. Sometimes it's more expedient with a shoplifter to actually not arrest them, but to take their details and report them for process, as they call it. So they're dealt with by means of summons. That's assuming that, of course, you can verify their address, etc., etc. And we come back to the other thing, you know, it's the sheer bureaucracy of it. If every shoplifting, if police were able to attend to every shoplifting, then we just spoken about the amount of paperwork one shoplifting produces. So that means the officers possibly are off for the rest of their shift. And there could be 3, 4, 5 or 6 other shoplifting offences going on. And then, as I say, you've got to get it past the Crown Prosecution Service, who've also been cut to ribbons, really. So are they going to spend a huge amount of time processing and taking someone to court who's nicked maybe 10 bottles of whiskey out of a supermarket? And that's still quite a lot of money. I could be wrong, but I think it's got to be £200 before we prosecute. So you've got to nick £200 worth of gear before anyone even thinks, because of the pressure on the system. Shoplifters are entitled to go to Crown Court. Now, you look at the lists now, the length of time it takes to bring a job to trial now, after COVID especially, the criminal justice system is in meltdown. Talk to anyone. So how are you going to bring in all these extra shoplifters who should be brought into the system? Where are you going to fit them in? You're going to have their defence solicitors saying, plead not guilty. Yeah, plead not guilty. Good for them, because they get money in legal aid. And they know possibly that case will never ever come to court because the criminal justice system is in shreds. Right. So that it's not just the police not wanting to charge people. Police by and large want to charge people. They want to arrest people. I enjoyed arresting bad people. But half the jobs I had when I was a PC, and I think I was involved in 200 arrests in my first 2 years, probably the majority of those these days would never get to court. In those days, they just about all got to court. And in those days, we didn't have the CPS. In those days, I could prosecute as a probationer my own cases. And I didn't lose them either. So I would stand up, I would cross-examine the person who was the shoplifter or committed the assault, me, a lowly probationary PC. But it got the job done. And if it became complicated, then you would get assistance from Scotland Yard, had its own band of solicitors and barristers, and it would be adjourned, and they would come in and take the case over. But there wasn't the bureaucracy you've got today. Now, if every shoplifter was charged and the intention was to bring them before a court, the system would collapse. So that's basically why you've got the problem that you've got. How you fix it, you put more money into the system. The country hasn't got money. After 12 years or whatever, the country is in a complete and utter meltdown. Wherever you look, nothing's working. It's not just policing, it's not just the criminal justice system. It's hospitals, isn't it? It's the health service, it's our transport system. The whole, we seem to be in general meltdown, and policing is part of this. But if the meltdown continues, and we get, as a result, some serious public order problems as a result of the country deteriorating even further. So we have a 2011 situation, whatever creates it, then again the question has to be asked, how or would police be able to cope as well as they did in 2011, and then even in 2011 that was a disaster. But after that you had literally hundreds of arrests, if you remember. People who were involved, every force threw loads of resources at arresting people who were involved in the rioting, and hundreds were arrested, and a lot of them were sent to prison. Probably that wouldn't be possible these days for the reasons I've just said. The system's in meltdown already. So, huge challenges ahead for police. I'm glad I'm not in it at the moment, I have to say.
If we look from the point of view of someone who nicks watches, and they know that the charging rate is 0.8%, and they pretty much, for the 100 watches they steal, only one of them is going to be charged, and then who knows what will happen with that. It kind of becomes, what is there to stop that criminal from keep doing the crime?
That's right. I suppose one thing is the criminal's never quite sure whether he's going to be charged or not, because it's a little bit of a lottery. If you're talking about with the Rolex robbers, you're really descending there into robbery, because you're using force to commit the offence. And if you use force to commit the offence, then that increases considerably the odds of you being charged and being dragged before a court for the offence of robbery. If you sneak out, and I've seen it, I've seen people help themselves from shelves and just walk out with the staff shouting at them. But they know that unless somebody tackles them, then they're probably going to get away with it. Even if there's good CCTV footage, they're probably going to get away with it. But if you rob someone, if you use force to take that watch or take that mobile phone, then and you're caught, then the odds are you're going to be charged. And for the offence of robbery, depending on how serious the violence is, you do stand a chance of a risk of going to prison.
Right. I did see this excellent undercover police operation recently as well to catch the watch robbers.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that shows what can be done. But again, it's resource intensive. You have to throw quite a lot of officers at it. But yeah, if you had more officers, you'd be able to do more of those sorts of operations and stretch it into other fields. So more officers, better training for officers, and you want to keep the officers that you recruit. But at the moment, it looks as though the Met are going to have to turn around and think about numbers and what they can afford to do. Many police officers would like to see police stations reopened, where they've not been sold off. Yeah. As I said before, a return to borough policing. But there's no sign of that happening at the moment. The Commissioner probably thinks, I just haven't got the resources to do it. I'd like to do it. I'd like to have more people out on the beat. I'd like to have more community policing. He has said that he wants to see more of a return to community policing. But again, where are you going to get the officers from to do it? He's got a serious problem at the moment, not helped by the bad publicity and retention. If we go back, and it's not just crime that officers deal with, we go back to, remember the long hot summer and the fires, 3 times in the month of June, and twice it was captured on people's mobile phones. Police officers ran into burning buildings. They got there before the fire brigade, ran into burning buildings to try and rescue people they thought might be trapped in those buildings. No one was particularly interested in that. I think one local paper picked up one of them, but no one was particularly bothered about that. That was good, brave policing. Goes on every day. No one's really interested in it. And that again saps morale and brings people to say, well, they don't do nothing. They don't do anything about shoplifters. They don't do anything about this. They don't do anything about that. But the good work that's carried out doesn't often get a huge amount of publicity. The Rolex robbers, where the Met did make a point of giving it to the media, and obviously the media were interested because it was quite, and it got a fair amount of publicity. But stuff like that goes on, on a daily basis, and I've often thought it'd be very interesting if somebody kept a record of the number of lives saved by officers during the course, be it in the Met or be it nationally, by their interventions. Might be someone who's been stabbed, it might be somebody who's threatening to throw himself off a building, but the number of lives that police officers save in the course of a year. But no one's particularly interested in that unless there's an angle, and that is a bit soul-destroying.
So when the media reports unfavourably about the police, how come the police don't respond very often?
I think it's one of the frustrations that the police officers have, certainly in the Met, and I think in many other forces, that what they call comms, Met comms, isn't as good as it should be. So they don't respond to criticism. Sometimes they can't, because it's the IOPC who investigate complaints are involved, so they have to stay quiet. But I think what's also frustrating is positive actions by the Met and other forces, that Met comms and other force communications don't publicise where there has been outstanding work. If you look in London over any 24-hour period, you will find examples of outstanding police work, bravery, compassion, life saved. Why isn't it out there? The Rolex robbers that we spoke about, the Met did put that out there and got a lot of praise for that. But why isn't it done more often? Why don't the Met promote good work done by its officers? There are signs that that's changing, but it's also not consistent. And it's very, very, very frustrating for officers to see their good work unrecognised. But also in terms of public perception, the Commissioner mentioned, didn't he, when he first took office, hundreds of officers that he was going to have to sack. So that probably the member of the public will think, if they're facing a police officer, they'll probably think, oh God, you know, I'm talking to a corrupt, misogynistic racist here. But there's no balance. So I think the frustration really is, and the message to the Commissioner and to Chief Constables is get your comms in order and get good stuff, good work, good performance, life-saving work, get it out there so the public get a true perspective of what policing is all about and what officers achieve on a daily basis. And at the moment, you'd have to say, generally, with the odd exception, police comms fails and it needs to improve.
You mentioned the IOPC there. So that's an organisation that investigates police conduct, is it?
It is. There's a perception that the IOPC, first of all, are incompetent and are unfair. I think that in itself is a little bit unfair because I think very much it depends on the investigators themselves. I think you have got some good investigators, and occasionally you will see a result where you think, oh, they've done that well. But too often it seems as if the IOPC tends to be playing to the gallery. Now I can give examples, but unfortunately they're ongoing cases. So, but yeah, there's some examples there that have really angered police, and police feel that they're not getting a fair crack of the whip. And the other problem is some of these investigations take years. So you've got the officer who's out on a limb for years and years before there's a decision even been reached as to what's going to happen to that officer. Is he going to be prosecuted? One case went on for 10 years where a guy was shot dead by a police officer. And it went through an incredible number of hurdles, as it were, this officer, and eventually after 10 years he was cleared. Some others go on for 2, 3, 4 years. So there's bitterness and anger to the IOPC, and there's a feeling, and the IOPC was reformed from another complaints organisation in order to make it better and more efficient. I think most rank and file officers would say, right, I'm sorry, you've got to strip this down and start again and get some competent people in charge, not an organisation that a lot of the time seems to play to the gallery rather than get the job done in a fair way. So, yeah, reform of the IOPC, but that ain't going to happen either.
I wanted to ask you about knife crime. In the last decade or so, this has risen a lot. What's it like for officers dealing with them? What are the challenges?
Well, huge. I mean, when I was a PC and a uniformed sergeant, I probably went to 3 stabbings, none of which were particularly serious. These days, officers in parts of London can expect to go to a succession of stabbings, which are serious and are life-threatening, and then have to deal with the immediate aftermath of that stabbing. They don't know when they're called to a stabbing what they're going to find when they get there, whether they're going to find some lunatic with a knife, or whether they're going to have to perform first aid, because often police are there before paramedics. And police training with first aid after Stephen Lawrence, it's improved over the years. If you look at our armed police, Trojan units, a lot of those officers are trained to a very almost paramedic standard, purely because we've got a problem with stabbings and shootings heaven forbid that they go on the rise, but there seem to be a few more shootings. Used to be a lot of shootings in the 90s, Trident, Operation Trident, Yardies. That was a major problem for the Met, and that's another story in itself. So it's a huge problem. And the gang culture, I mean, the Casey report, I took the Casey report to task. She barely mentioned the issue of gangs in London. In fact, I don't think she did mention it. There's a couple of other recent reports by the Inspectorate on stop and search. No real reference to gangs at all, mentioned occasionally in passing by others who featured in the report. Yeah, it's a colossal problem in London. You know, the gangs control certain areas. Some of these gangs have been in existence for more than 20 years, back to the 90s, the Yardie days. Other gangs come and go. Drill music is associated with gangs. The drill rappers also have to be tough and hard and gain reputations. And these are personalities in their own right. These are personalities who will have hundreds of thousands of followers. And everybody knows they're bad. Everybody knows one's just been arrested. In fact, there's a whole cocktail of them in prisons, drill rappers. And it's almost as if the drill rappers, to stay on top of their game, have to be violent. They can't be seen to be losing a fight, for example, or getting battered. Or if they do, they have to get the revenge quickly. So the gang problem in London is massive, and it's made worse by the fact that the gang leaders, the drill rappers, are personalities literally worshipped and followed by hundreds of thousands of youngsters. It's a major problem. And it's one that I think the Met needs to inform the public of how serious a problem it is. And that, of course, lends itself to knife culture, knife crime. Gang members carry knives. They attack rival gang members. They insult each other on YouTube, on their drill music videos. And of course, then it spreads. It's almost, a knife becomes a fashion accessory. So people, even if they're not necessarily linked to a gang, might well go out with a knife, maybe to protect themselves, for example. One of the features about gang culture and drill music, for a start, they've got their own news channels on YouTube. They've got guys who will produce, and if you want to know something about a stabbing or a shooting, the best place to find out about it is YouTube, because they do their news bulletin on the stabbing, and then underneath you've got dozens and dozens of comments, often telling you what's happened or what hasn't happened, so you can really get a good picture. They also produce their own documentaries, gang documentaries. So if you want to know a history about certain gangs, you can find that on YouTube. Harlem Spartans, OFB, 3x3, all these, there's loads of them across London. And you think to yourself, well, how has it come to this? There wasn't a sort of an attempt to take these gang music videos down, drill music videos down. That seems to have fallen by the wayside, and they just repost them. They just put them up again. So the gang culture is a massive problem. I've got a lot of friends in teaching, because I used to teach for a little while. And head teachers there will tell you about the problems they've got with gangs in schools, because all the kids will know the local gang. They will know the personalities in that gang. They become almost heroes to these school pupils. And of course, in certain schools, you will have younger gang members will be part of that school, which again presents a huge challenge to teachers. And of course, you have had police assigned to certain schools, so it'll be a challenge for those officers as well. But the gang culture across London is absolutely massive. And the other point to remember is, of course, the stabbings that you've just referred to. We hear about the stabbings that are serious, stabbings where police turn up and will report the stabbing with the victim and details of the suspect, etc., etc. But what we don't appreciate, and really perhaps the Met would rather, keep it maybe a little bit under wraps, is a number of stabbings that take place that never ever get reported to police. So it's a whole, and you can see again on the gang social media, they have scoreboards on YouTube. You can find them where you've got two gangs that are rival gangs and people keep score. So you get so many points for a murder, so many points for a stabbing, so many points for a shooting, so many points if you beat up a rival gang member, so many points if that gang member isn't actually beaten up but does a runner from a rival gang. And people, you just search on scoreboards on YouTube and you'll find these people keep score between the rival, two rival gangs. That's how awful the situation is at the moment. And as I say, a lot of stabbings that take place, you can find them on the scoreboards, who stabbed who, but they won't appear in police records. They might in intelligence records, because I'm sure police will be looking at these anyway to see what they've missed, what the tensions are, and they will find there so-and-so stabbed so-and-so. Well, we've got no record of that. And often they will treat minor stab wounds with super glue. They will self-treat. And there's also apparently, so people who know about these things tell me, there's a backstreet industry as well, where you've got certain places they can go to, might be a nurse or someone like that, where they can go and get stitched up without having to go to hospital where there's a danger, or theoretically the staff should report that stabbing or shooting to police. So they'll go elsewhere. Obviously, if it's really serious, then they're going to end up in hospital. There's plenty of stabbings that go on that will never get reported to the police, and that's the extent of the problem in London. Massive.
My final question. Magic wand, you can change 3 things to improve policing. What would they be?
Wow. Probably abolish the IOPC, the Independent Office for Police Conduct. They investigate the more serious complaints against police officers. They're hugely mistrusted. More officers. We need to get, if we're going to police this country properly, we're going to need more officers to do it effectively. Maybe not get up to the numbers the French have got, but certainly another 50,000 officers will go down. We're only back to the way we were. And with those officers, better police support, because a lot of police support staff have gone. More officers and a return. You've got to keep response at a high level, response policing, but a return to community policing. We want officers out there and to be visible. We want our 999 calls answered, and sometimes they're not answered for one reason or another. Remember the recent case we've had in Norfolk, isn't it, with the police not responding, as police have said they won't, to mental health calls, and we get 4 dead people. But you just need this balance. You need your emergencies responded to. You also need officers out there in the community, getting to know people. Bottom line is return to community policing, but that needs more officers, more support staff, more police buildings. That ain't going to happen.
Chris Hobbs, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.